to another webcast of A Mirror Darkly. Today's episode is The Value of Fiction. This is our 21st webcast. We've been doing this for a little while now. Of course, we still haven't gotten used to the technology, I don't think. We will get it there eventually. Now, one of the interesting things to me is the fact that we call things that are not fiction nonfiction, as we don't have a special term for nonfiction. It's not fiction. It's interesting that the English language works that way.
I made the mistake this week. I was talking about nonfiction and I called it fiction because you would think that you would have a word for stuff that's true and then alter it for things that are untrue, like true and untrue.
Yeah, except that, and this is what we're going to talk about, fiction is not necessarily untrue.
Right.
That is, the stories themselves may not be real, but that doesn't mean that what's being talked about in them is untrue.
Right. Well, we talk about that in third grade when we're teaching the genres. There's realistic fiction, like it could happen, but it didn't. And then there's fantasy, which most of it can't happen. There's real elements to it,
Yes.
but and that's true of fable, parable, things like that. That there's things that can happen, but then there's things that can't happen in it. So, like in fables, like animals don't talk.
Right.
But
what the point of a fable is, though, is usually something that's true. Now, there's not a clear-cut, hard and fast dividing line between fable and parable, I don't think.
right.
It is, fable is usually thought of as being something where plants or animals are anthropomorphized, while with parables it's just people. However, if you ever read a copy of Aesop's fables, you'll find that a lot of them actually are just people doing things.
Right.
And so, and those are not significantly different than what Jesus did.
Well, parable is usually applied to biblical stories and
because
fable.
people are uncomfortable with the idea of there being fables in the Bible.
Yeah.
Although you do have fables, that is, it fit the classic definition. In the Old Testament, you have one of Gideon's sons stands up after the city had slaughtered all his brothers, and he tells a fable about the plants of the field going out to find a king. And eventually they find a thistle that's willing to do it, and then he ran away because it was obvious who he was talking about. And he was wanting to make sure he didn't end up like his brothers. You're making noise.
Yeah, it's just my sounds are up, but my media's not up.
Okay, good. But I've noticed that there are some Christians that are vehemently opposed to the whole concept of fiction, feeling that it's almost not compatible with Christianity. I remember years ago at a previous church that we attended, there was a woman there that just did not accept the idea that fiction could be an acceptable thing. She just utterly rejected it.
Well, my mother was raised where you only read biographies. It wasn't even just reading things that are nonfiction. It was only biographies.
Why only biographies, do you suppose?
I'm not sure why biographies specifically, but I should ask her. But that's all she reads to this day. I could buy her any number of other books. Like she won't sit down and read a book about the Bible that will teach you more things about the Bible. She reads biographies. So I think the closest she gets to non-biographical true stuff is all the killing books by that guy that was fired from Fox News, Bill. What was his name? Killing Lincoln, killing Kennedy.
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill O'Reilly, yeah.
Well, those are semi-biographical.
Yeah, so
that fit into her what she's comfortable with.
Right. So, but that's kind of the end of her leash.
Yeah, well, I know several years ago when we had a Christian writers group that met here. It was before I started attending, but apparently there are a couple of women there that just did not want fiction to be part of the group because they just did not think fiction worked with Christianity. I'm not really sure why that exists within the church. Oddly enough, there's a certain element of that even within Christian publishing. That is, Christian fiction exists in a weird place in the Christian publishing world. The restrictions on what is permissible within Christian fiction is rather significant. And to the extent that oftentimes you end up almost not being able to have one of the essential elements of fiction, conflict.
Yeah. Well, because God solves all your problems.
Yeah, it's hard.
If you just pray and have enough faith, God solves all your problems, and that's kind of a dumb book to read. So.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of Christian fiction, though, really sucks, because it's like, well, like a lot, like Christian movies are a good example of this.
Yes. It's a form of Christian
Yeah.
fiction.
What I like about movies like Facing the Giants and what's that other one they did? The same group. Like they showed Christians actually having real problems and struggling with getting through them.
Right.
You know, but a lot of Christian movies are either very mystical, like heaven really does exist or whatever it was called, which was debunked shortly after the movie came out.
Yes.
Those kinds, they're either super mystical, where everything is like super miraculous and it's like, you know, like really far-fetched. Or it's like, oh, we have this problem. Let's all pray and have a Bible study. Oh, look, the problem's solved. It's like, they're really usually, and the writing is usually really sappy, and the acting is usually pretty poor. And I think that's one of the things I liked about Facing the Giants, because even though it was done it was pretty amateur. It was still really well acted, and I felt the script was really strong. The writing was really strong. And it wasn't just a matter of...
Of course, they were independent productions, and so you didn't have quite the same constraints
Right.
that's often faced.
Yeah.
Now, one of my favorite forms of fiction, of course, is science fiction. And I remember reading a few years ago on the website io9.com, which is a website devoted to science fiction. And they had an article talking about how Christian readers want to have more science fiction books. And they were asking the question, why aren't Christian publishers listening? And Christian publishers have always had poor results from their attempts to publish science fiction. For one thing, they oftentimes are uncomfortable calling it science fiction. They'll come up with some other term for it. And then the other problem with it is what afflicts Christian fiction as a whole is that oftentimes it's simply not very well done. And so Christians read science fiction, they want to read good science fiction, and so they don't check out the offerings by the Christian publishers because it's never been any good.
Right.
And so then it doesn't sell. But there's a reason it doesn't sell, because the Christian publishers don't allow, well, essentially real science fiction to be published by them. And so they can't break into the market because they're not actually producing science fiction.
Well, think about the 2 plays that you wrote. You wrote the one pilot, which we performed here at the church, which was very well received, and it was really, really powerful. There was another one about Mary.
Virgin was the title of it.
Yeah, it was called Virgin. I forgot what the title was. But anyway, and it focused on Mary and her, what she experienced with having Jesus. And huge uproar in our church about some of the things that were said, because she was a young girl who was not married, who was pregnant, and she had this story that
Nobody believed.
that nobody believed. So she probably got called some names and stuff, and that was in the play. And just people that were here in our church that knew us were like super offended and wanted it changed. And we ended up
Just not doing it.
Yeah, we ended up just pulling it because they
Well,
weren't ready
even
for it.
Pilate, there was opposition to aspects of it,
Uh-huh.
and there was an insistence on adding after the play some kind of a preaching little thing,
Oh.
as if somehow people couldn't figure out what the play was about
Oh.
by itself, and it just annoyed me. But that's what is faced, generally speaking, in the Christian publishing world, trying to get fiction published. It's just very, very difficult. More so than it should be. I mean, getting fiction published regardless is not the easiest thing in the world. And it's all very subjective. I mean, even best-selling authors like J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series was rejected over 20 times before she finally found a publisher. And that's rather typical.
There's
Stephen King...
20 people out there kicking themselves.
Probably. I mean, Stephen King, he got so discouraged trying to get something published that he actually threw Carrie in the trash. And his wife fished it out and encouraged him to keep trying. Of course, it did work out. But it's just
Well, what I think is
hard,
ironic,
regardless.
what I think is ironic though, in regular science fiction, non-Christian science fiction, there are Christian themes that run all through science fiction.
Yes, there are. Well, for instance, I'm reading a book right now by Robert J. Sawyer. He's a Canadian science fiction author. And his books typically deal with religious themes. But he's not a quote-unquote Christian author, and yet those things show up. And so you have books, like one of the books was entitled Calculating God. You've had other books by other authors that will deal with religious themes in science fiction. And then, of course, I mean, even when you look at like J.K. Rowling or C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien, the reason that the Harry Potter novels there's 7 of them, is because she was consciously coming up with the same number as with C.S. Lewis's Narnia series.
Oh,
That's why
that I
she did
didn't
7.
know. Oh, okay.
And of course, if you get to the last book, it's quite obvious some of the Christian themes, or you even have quotations from the Bible in it. And it's funny because you'll have Christians that'll be up in arms against, or at least used to be up in arms against Harry Potter books. I'm sure there's still some out there, although they'll embrace C.S. Lewis or Tolkien.
And see, that's why I don't like inconsistency. I mean, if you're going to be consistent, that you want to be consistently wrong, that's better than being inconsistent and being wrong part of the time. Like my mom, only biographies, that is her thing. That's all she reads, and she's consistent in any reading that she does. And so, you know, I think being consistent is better than waffling to, like, oh, we don't like Harry Potter because it's witchcraft, but we read C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
You know?
And what frustrates me with Christians and their reaction to fiction is they fail to reckon with the fact that you do have fiction in the Bible. As you got the fables, you got Jesus' parables. I would argue the book of Job is probably not a verbatim account of whatever happened, or even if Job actually existed. I mean, it's clearly a fictionalized accounting of things. It's written in poetry. People don't talk in poetry. And some of the things that Christian publishers are loath to print, one finds in the biblical stories.
Are you talking about sex?
Well, not just
And
sex.
violence.
Well, you've got sex and violence. There is that, although it's oftentimes obscured by how things get translated. But, you know, you have ghost stories. That is, you have the story of Saul going to a medium, and she brings up Samuel. And Samuel tells him, bad news, Saul, you're going to be with me here tomorrow. And it's one of those things that's hard to reconcile with what people normally think of from a theological standpoint.
Mhm.
It is, it's, science fiction author wrote a book, what was the title of it? Both his name and the name of the book go out of my head. But he talked about in physics or in science in general that you'll run experiments and you'll get some weird results sometimes that just don't fit anything.
Mhm.
And rather than just tossing them out or pretending they're not there, you acknowledge that, we got this weird result. And so it just sits there kind of mocking you.
Mhm.
And you hope eventually to be able to figure out a way to make it fit. And there are things biblically, the story of Samuel and Saul, Samuel's ghost and Saul, it's one of those sorts of things. It just doesn't really mesh nicely with what we think things should be theologically.
Mhm.
Of course, then you have the interesting fact that Jesus, Jesus' disciples on more than one occasion are afraid that they're seeing a ghost when they see him.
Mhm.
And Jesus doesn't tell them, well, there are no ghosts. He says, would a ghost have flesh and blood?
Mhm.
So you just have little weird things that don't fit. And if those sorts of things were to show up in a fiction book by a Christian author trying to get published by a Christian publisher,
Mhm.
it would never happen.
Right.
You'd have to change it, get rid of it, whatever. And yet there are those sorts of things in the Bible. That's part of what annoys me with Christian fiction or Christian publishers a lot of times, is they prohibit things that actually show up biblically.
Mhm.
I think one of the issues perhaps that some Christians have with fiction is just that it requires imagination.
Mhm.
And it is fantasy. It is something that is not actually has happened.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, that seems to be disturbing.
Mhm. Well, and even speculation
Yeah.
on stuff in Scripture, 'cause we've run into this in my Sunday school
Although
class.
theologians will do speculation all the time, pastors will do speculation all the time.
But because
And it
that's how you come up
becomes-
with new ideas and like, oh, maybe this is how it happened, but if you recognize that it's speculation and that until you have more evidence, you're not saying that it's true, but it could have happened this way. And that's what,
And that's how advancement is made in general. Is that
Right.
you hypothesize, you come up with, okay, would this explain what we're seeing?
mhm. Yeah.
Or could this and
But
this
I've
and that
run
be
into
true?
that even here, that, well, you're just speculating. Like, that's not good. Don't speculate.
Yeah, no, you're allowed to speculate. You should be encouraged to
Mhm.
speculate. The key thing is to make sure that people know that that's what you're doing.
Right, right.
What I find funny is that a lot of things that are set in stone theologically, at least on a popular level, a sizable percentage of them are entirely speculative and
Mhm.
have no real firm basis in the scriptural materials.
Mhm.
One of the classic is the serpent in Genesis chapter 3. The hypothesis is that is somehow Satan involved in that. The problem, though, is that you don't have any place else in Scripture that identifies the serpent in the garden as being the devil.
Mhm.
And so we are speculating when we say that, and yet most people think, well, that's what Scripture says.
Mhm.
No, it's not what Scripture says. It's what we think it may mean.
Right.
And so, again, a lot of inconsistency because people are opposed to speculation, yet they have glommed on to some speculation and think it's gospel truth.
Mhm.
People don't always know what's speculative. And one of the values of fiction, particularly when you think in terms theologically or even scientifically, is that it can give you ideas. It can help you think through things in ways that you otherwise might not be able to.
Mhm.
So, for instance, from a theological standpoint, if you're familiar with stories of time travel and that sort of thing, then it opens up interesting possibilities to explain some things that we see theologically.
Mhm.
That is, what is God's relationship then to the universe?
Mhm.
And not only is he outside of space, he's also outside of time, and so that.
Which my mother cannot conceptualize.
Yes.
Because she only reads biographies.
And she also hasn't read any modern science.
Right.
That is, if she reads
And no
physics.
science fiction
And see
either.
that's the other thing. You have a connection between science fiction and science and reality, because a lot of scientists are also science fiction fans. And a lot of times part of their reason for going into science is because they enjoyed some of these stories. And then, well, for instance, I read the biography. I tried to get you should try to get your mother to read the book. I've talked about it on the webcast before. A physicist, he's
Oh, yeah.
retired now, but the whole reason he went into physics is because he wanted to build a time machine so he could go back and visit his father, who had died tragically at a younger age. He missed his father. And he was inspired after reading H.G. Wells' Time Machine. He actually read it in a comic book form first, because he was young at the time.
Now we call them graphic novels.
Yes, it was a graphic novel.
Not the floppy kind. If you read a thick comic book,
Yes.
they're graphic novels.
Well, any of them are graphic novels.
That's true.
Yeah. Which is fine. But anyway, and he kept his interest in making a time machine secret from everybody, because he knew it was rather a weird sort of a thing. And he didn't want to get labeled as a nutcase before he established himself in his career. But once he was established in his career, then he could be more open about. Plus, by that time, there was more widespread interest in science, in physics as a whole, on the whole question of, is time travel possible? How would you do it? And you have Kip Thorne and what's his name? Particle physicist at Tulane University in Louisiana, wrote The Physics of God.
Isn't it funny? I can remember everything
I can
around
remember everything
except
except
the
his name.
I know. I know somebody gave me their phone number yesterday, and I couldn't remember her name to put it in my contacts. And I was
Kepler.
like, I looked at Facebook to find
Kepler
it.
is
I was
the-
sitting next to her.
Yeah, Kepler is his last name, and
Old people problems.
yeah. Anyway, he several years ago now proposed a way of creating a time machine, a Tipler cylinder. That is, you have a very large cylinder spinning rapidly, made out of neutronium, and if you aim something just right at the edge, you can get it to go into a closed time. Anyway, make it time travel.
I'll start humming.
Yes. But anyway, all these things work together. Funny story.
Oh, Dean's here. He wants his flying car. Dean does.
Well, those may not be entirely practical. is the problem.
People have enough trouble driving on the road. Can you imagine if they could drive in 3 dimensions?
Yeah, that's the issue. Once you get full autonomy, then maybe. And you do have a few companies that are working on it. They're all essentially like drones
Yeah.
as far as the way they function. And so they'd have a range, however you could go in like 45 minutes or so. But they would be pretty much autonomous.
And you need a pilot's license to fly them.
Well,
too.
a lot of the companies are thinking more in terms of like taxi service, like Uber or something for it. So it could happen. The computer technology is the key to making it practical, because you don't want your average driver to be in 3 dimensions instead of 2.
Well, my hygienist doesn't even like autonomous features on her car. She doesn't even use her cruise control. She's like, nope, I do it myself. And I'm like, dang, I like all the autonomous features because it catches things my brain doesn't catch fast enough. She's like, nope, I'll just do it myself. I'm a good driver. I'm like, yeah, I'm a really good driver too. And I think autonomous features are nice.
Yeah, well, eventually cars will be able to drive better than we can.
Yes.
So it's not that far away. And probably eventually it'll be illegal to drive your car yourself, and you'd think, well, that would be stupid to drive the car myself.
I would miss it though, because I enjoy driving, so I would really miss it.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, you think in terms of like, I mean, with aircraft, commercial aircraft, they mostly fly themselves. You
taking
have a-
off and landing is all you need the pilot for.
Yeah,
and
although
emergencies.
but even then, the airplane actually can take off and land by itself. It's
Mhm.
just that people like to have a pilot there because nobody fully trusts
Yeah.
so everybody's still afraid of the
Well,
machine.
and there's still those instances where you need to be able to think creatively.
Right.
which
And
the
computers
computer
are not
cannot
very
do
good
it
at yet.
So you still
Yes.
need that skill level. And like, for example, okay, with my mom's car, she has a new car, and so it's got some really nice autonomous features. One of them is when you're in cruise control, it has radar that comes out of the front, so that if the cars in front of you are slowing down or stopping, you will stop at a safe distance from the cars in front of you. However, I discovered that if you're going up a hill and the cars that are stopped are at the top of the hill, the radar goes straight out. So it's essentially going to the sky, not to the cars that are stopped. So I'm just coming up this hill in cruise control, so I'm not losing any speed because the car is like, you said to go 45, I'm going 45, you know, up this hill. And then I realized the cars are coming at me dangerously closely. So I hit the brakes, and my mom goes, wow, that was scary. I go, yeah, it got it outside my comfort zone too. But now I've learned this about the car. So if I'm on a hill and the cars that are stopped in front of me are not also on the face of the hill with me, that I need to be ready to stop the car.
Because it won't notice.
Right, it doesn't notice them. So, and some, like on a curve too.
Mhm.
If there's enough of a curve in the road, actually the car will slow down for cars that are in the next lane because the intelligence isn't there yet
Right.
for the car to go, oh wait, that car's in the next lane. But let me tell you something, when a car pulls in front of you, the car slows itself down, it pulls you back to a safe distance. It's really nice, and it takes some of the pressure off your brain while you're
Right.
driving.
And you can see where the systems are going to end up being.
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
It's what they call level 5 autonomy is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not quite there yet. They're probably about level 3 or so,
Mhm.
the best ones.
Yeah.
Um,
But then there's those two guys sleeping in their Teslas.
Well,
going-
yeah.
The one guy going down the 405.
Well-
I don't see how he slept because
well,
I
405 during rush hour is going 3 miles an hour anyways.
I know you probably could sleep and not have an autonomous
And
car.
it's not the
but
first time people have been caught doing that.
I know, but still, it would.
It's stupid
Uh-huh.
at this point.
Yeah, I don't know how he slept because I have to fully trust whoever's driving in order for me to seriously fall asleep in a car. So,
But see, one of the values of fiction and thinking even about something like autonomous cars, you get into philosophical issues. If you've watched A Good Place,
Mhm.
they deal with philosophy.
The
and
Good Place.
The Good Place, they deal with philosophy and
Mhm.
ethics and any number of things you wouldn't expect from a sitcom. Remember the trolley problem?
vaguely.
Yeah, they kept smashing into a bunch of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's the issue with an autonomous car, that it's
Mhm.
going to have to make those kind of choices.
Mhm.
And so how do you program that? How do you
Mhm.
give it that kind of ability? And then what are the legal ramifications and all of that
Mhm.
from that? So it's a complicated problem.
What I like
and so fiction
about
allows you to think about it and
Right.
then try to come up with ways of...
that's what I was going to say about fiction. Fiction lets you play with stuff that you can't play with in real life
Exactly.
to see how it will come out.
And see, in history, it works this way too. It is, you have a subgenre of science fiction called alternate histories.
I was
But-
thinking of Back to the Future because
Yeah, Back to the
that
Future
kind of does
gets-
deal with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
deals with that a little bit.
where he starts fading out of the picture of his
Yeah,
family.
because
and
he's
stuff.
changed
Mhm.
things.
Oh, my cousin Steve is there. Hi, Steve. So my brother and my
But
cousin.
historians do that.
Mhm.
That is, that it grew out of historians doing what's called contrafactual history. And what the value of contrafactual history is, it forces you to think about what happened and what could have happened. What are
Mhm.
the different, it helps you analyze the historical situation in greater depth when you start thinking in terms of what are the other possibilities of what could have happened. There's 2 really good books out. They're called What If and What If 2. And the first one, I think the first one, focuses primarily on the American Revolution.
Mhm.
And what's fascinating as you go through that book is what a remarkable set of improbable events occurred that allowed us to win.
Mm-hmm.
That is, all things being equal, there's no way in the world we should have won that.
Mm-hmm.
That is, there are so many different things that happened remarkably out of the ordinary that allowed us to end up winning. Changes in weather, just all sorts of weird things
Mhm.
that just, and what's funny about that is it's so out of the ordinary that all the what ifs are the revolution fails.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues, another book that I have is on what ifs regarding World War II. And despite the alternate histories you might read, Man in the High Castle on Amazon Prime right now, there's no way in the world the Germans could have ever won.
Mm-hmm.
That is, no matter what scenario you do, no matter what choices they make different, they're going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
It was a completely hopeless case both for them and Japan. There's no way they could have ever won the war. The alternate history scenarios just are not realistic.
Right.
They're fun to play with from a fictional standpoint, but when you actually look at what was going on, what the options were, everything turns out badly for Germany and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting thing to look at
Interesting.
as well.
My brother said that he lives in Houston. He said here in Houston, Domino's is going to have unmanned delivery cars. The customer will get a code to retrieve their pizza from the car. So that'll be kind of fun.
Yeah.
I would order pizza just to have it delivered. It's like, do you want pizza tonight? No, but well, we can get unmanned delivery. Okay,
Yeah.
let's have pizza.
Play with the technology.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what happens when you're an early adopter. You just like to play with the new toy. But yeah, fiction has definite uses, and then of course you see in the Bible with Jesus. Part of the thing that people have to understand and why fiction is valuable is because our brains are wired that way.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we like stories. Storytelling is a very old thing in human civilization. It goes back to the very beginning.
Well, before writing, that's how you passed along. In civilizations where they didn't have a writing system, they had the oral tradition where
Right.
they passed along the stories.
And it's stories.
Mm-hmm.
It is, we know how stories work. We understand stories. We enjoy hearing stories. That is, giving simply a dry recitation of facts is not particularly interesting. Going back to Harry Potter.
Thinking about sermons.
And also thinking about sermons. But the worst professor consistently, besides Snape and his meanness, but so far as effectiveness as a professor, who did everybody dislike?
I do not remember. Don't even ask me an open-ended question.
Sorry, the history professor,
Oh.
who was
yeah.
a ghost.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And he taught history, and he was very, very boring.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact he's talking about goblin rebellions and all sorts of violence and sorts
In
of
Ferris
things.
Bueller's Day Off, wasn't the teacher, Bueller, wasn't he a history professor?
Might have been history or
History
economics.
teacher?
I'm not
Yeah.
sure which. And that's funny because if history is taught well, it's the most fascinating thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That is, people enjoy, say, for instance, gossip.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all history is. It's old gossip. And if you tell it in an interest, like you'd normally tell stories, people will be utterly fascinated by it. And that's one of the difficulties you face in preaching a sermon, is that you can, and I would be guilty of this, just going through their facts.
Especially early on, when
Yeah.
you were first preaching.
And that's just not very interesting. Look at how Jesus preached.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a key thing for us as we think in terms of, well, how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus told stories, he told parables, he told fiction.
Mm-hmm.
This holds people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so in preaching, you want to tell stories on yourself, you want to tell made-up stories even to illustrate what it is you're trying to get across, because that's what people pay attention to. Is when you're simply giving facts, you can watch people zone out.
Mm-hmm. And you can give any number of Bible references to support your point.
Yes.
I know this to be true, and it does not make the sermon any better.
No, it does not.
When he was first preaching, one of the comments I made was, if you keep doing this, nobody will come back. He's gotten much better, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
But yeah, telling stories is critically important.
Well, a good
because that's what
example.
people listen to.
I read a lot, at the beginning of third grade, we do a lot with government, like learning about our federal government and state government and the branches of government and things like that. And we learn a lot about the different monuments, and they do a project on it, and then we learn about some of the founding fathers, learn about Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. And there's a couple of books that I have that are, they're realistic fiction, and one of them is on Thomas Jefferson, and it has real things that he actually did. Like, he actually brought macaroni and cheese to America from France. Also, he got Americans to eat tomatoes. And in France, they were called love apples. And here in America, they thought that they were poisonous and didn't eat them.
Right, because the plants are related to nightshade.
Right. So, anyway, and there's a couple other things too that he brought from France. And so this story is told, it's called Thomas Jefferson's Dinner, I think it's called. Anyway, so he brings all these things to one dinner. And at the end of the book, it tells what things are true. And it says he didn't do all this probably at one dinner, but it's in that setting so that the kids get the idea of all the influences that Thomas Jefferson brought over. And then also too about Ben Franklin and his different inventions. He actually invented a chair that would fan him while he read, because he would sit in his house and read, and it was hot. So he had a fan chair. We called it the fan chair. We don't know if that's what he actually called it. But anyway, so the kids learned about, like, I had them write little short stories about how things were invented that Benjamin Franklin invented. And it was really cute. They, like making the first library here, that he really wanted more books and he didn't have enough books, so he opened up his own library, and things like that, and just had him fictionalize it. But
that's good.
yeah, so you can learn a lot as long as you know what's true and what's not. You can learn a lot from realistic fiction.
Yeah. Well, as a good example of that, some of the best psychological fiction, that is, the characters being fully formed and really fascinating as individuals, and for a psychological study, Dostoevsky, Russian author. Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, any of his books. The characters are just the most fascinating things.
Not a fan of Russian literature here, I will tell you.
I know, and it does take, you have to get used to...
It's like trudging naked through 12 feet of snow.
Of course, you're reading Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he was writing history like Professor Binns and Harry Potter. Unless you're a historian and have a high threshold for pain, you're not going to get through it.
Yeah.
However,
and I didn't get through it. I pretended I did.
However, I think if you were to read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, it's short. It takes one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich. He is a political prisoner in the Gulag, and it takes one of his days, a good day, and takes you through the whole thing. And it's just horrific. But it gives you insight as to what it was like to be in that kind of a concentration camp under the Soviet system. And it's fictionalized. It's based to a large extent on Solzhenitsyn's experiences having been in the Gulag. But anyway, so no, Russian fiction can be good. The Gulag Archipelago isn't fiction, it's history.
It was painful.
But Russian fiction can be painful because you've got long names. Also, a lot of the better known stuff is from the 19th century, and even things in English from the 19th century, like reading Dickens. I mean, it's a little bit more difficult to read because it's a different form of writing than what we do now. I mean, even Mark Twain is still a little bit tricky for a modern reader just because we don't write things that way.
Right.
We're not used to that. And so certainly if you're reading 19th century Russian author, you've got two strikes against you there. You've got the cultural divide, it's translated, and then it's still in a writing style that isn't current.
Now, another set of books that's really good to read, and I would recommend it even for adults, is the Magic Tree House books, the Merlin series, because Merlin takes the kids from the Magic Tree House to different points in history. And the one that I read to my class is called A Tale for Christmas Time or something like that. But anyway, they go back to, when you mentioned Charles Dickens, they go back to Charles Dickens, and he decided to quit writing because it was hard and nobody was reading his stuff, and he ends up writing A Christmas Story. And and it gives you a real flavor for how things were, like the kids become chimney sweeps to get into the house, and it gives a real flavor for what life was like for poor children back in it was Victorian England, right? Was that Victorian England, or was it?
It might have been slightly earlier.
Okay, but anyway, what life was like, the kids working and stuff. And then, now, I don't read A Christmas Story to them. We watch the Muppets. Christmas Carol, or not A Christmas Story, Christmas Carol.
Yes,
What did I say, Christmas Story?
movie.
Yeah, that's really good. But yeah, they can't show that at school.
No.
The rating's not G. But A Christmas Carol, we watch the Muppets Christmas Carol, so they kind of get the idea of what it's about. So, but anyway, so a lot of those Merlin series books are really good. So,
Yeah. So fiction, fiction covers a wide range of things. That is, the nursery rhymes that people tell their children, the nursery stories, those are all fiction.
Fairy tales
Fairy tales.
are usually to teach children to be good.
Right.
Yeah, like Little Red Riding Hood, don't talk to strangers, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're parabolistic in their purpose, and a lot of fiction will tend to be that way. Now that can be a danger. Is the primary purpose of fiction always, if you're writing fiction, is to entertain. That is, you shouldn't be using it as a polemic, because that results in really bad fiction. And that's something that happens with certain forms of modern fiction. I've noticed on occasion people start putting their political or religious points of view in, and that becomes the dominant thing. And so you're getting whacked over the head by the stuff. And sometimes it's not realistic, even close. So it's hard to suspend disbelief long enough to actually get through the stories. But fiction is the way we think, and it's one of the best ways that we learn. And so that's the primary value of fiction, is that's how you're going to hold an audience's attention. It's how you hold, if you're teaching, whatever you're doing, it's the stories that people glom on to, and that's what they'll remember mostly, not so much your list of facts. Stories can be hard to do. What's interesting, when I was in junior high, took a class in Westerns, and the teacher pointed out at the beginning that there's only so many plots. And actually you can say that in general for stories as a whole. There's a very limited number of plots. Campbell, the mythicist, pointed out that one of the most common plots is what's called the hero's journey. The downside of Campbell's pointing this out, though, is that a huge number of big budget movies have followed the hero's journey slavishly. And to the point that it becomes almost boring because it's just the same thing over and over again. Classic, one of the first movies that did this consciously was the first Star Wars movie. Because Lucas was a big fan of Campbell, and he purposely designed the plot of that Star Wars movie to follow the hero's journey. There's some biblical stories that follow the hero's journey. So, for instance, the story of David follows the hero's journey. He's not the only one. There's a few places in the Bible that you can see that plot. And it's common throughout ancient literature as well. So it's one of the oldest and most common plots, but it's not the only plot. It's not the only
Well,
way
fairy
to do
tale
it.
is very limited. Good fairy
Yes.
tale has definite good, definite evil, a magical event, some kind of conflict, a magical event that resolves it. And if you look at the classic fairy tales, you have that all through them.
Right.
The ones that aren't as good, like Frozen, I sat there in Frozen totally confused. Is this person evil? Is this, because there were like a lot of evil characters and I couldn't figure out who was the true evil. And you knew who good was, but I think Frozen fell on its face. I mean, I know a lot of little kids liked it because of the music, and even then I was so sick of the Frozen theme song. But
from a literary standpoint, it didn't really work quite
yeah,
right.
it didn't. There were a lot of people that liked it, but I didn't.
Well, for instance, The Lion King, when they first had the script for it, it didn't work. And they redid the script following the hero's journey. That's how they fixed it. And so then it worked. Frozen didn't work. Another genre of literature or movies that has a very strict format are romantic comedies. And as romantic comedy goes in a certain pattern, and woe to you if you don't
Which is
follow.
one you didn't like. You won't watch it because.
Yeah, because it screws it up. Just like your attitude towards Frozen.
Yeah.
That is, I look at the thing, and the two people that end up together at the end are not the two people that should have, based on the normal pattern.
What
for.
movie was that?
I don't remember what it was now, but it just messed it up. And for a while, I had trouble seeing the particular actor that was in that movie and other things because I kept remembering, you're not supposed to be with the girl. You're a jerk. You shouldn't be with her. So now you can make adjustments to it. So, for instance, the movie Hitch is an interesting twisting of the standard romantic comedy where you end up with two people, two different couples. But it works because they essentially follow the conventions, they just make it slightly different. Another genre that has very strict conventions are your typical horror movies, slasher films, particularly. If you watch, what's the one? Is it Scream? I thought it was a pretty well done movie because they actually talk about the tropes that you're supposed to go through the horror movie through the thing.
Well,
And
it's a spoof movie.
That one is a
Scream?
spoof
Okay.
movie. What was the one that was a spoof movie? That one's funny to watch if you know how things are supposed to go. So some genres are very strict in how things are supposed to go, and if you're an author or movie maker doing that kind of film, you better be very careful about fiddling with that standard plot.
Okay, example. Here's another example, War of the Worlds. I hated the movie, but it's how the story is written, and you're explaining this to me, is that it's like there is no possibility he can get out of the problems he's in, but he does it anyway. Why? Because he's Tom Cruise? No, but that's the way it was written. But
well, the problem with that novel by H.G. Wells, and then with any of the subsequent movies, at the time he wrote it, the idea of germ theory was still pretty new concept. And so to use that as the way to solve the problem was kind of a new and nifty idea at the time.
okay.
Not anymore.
Right.
And even then, he has done something that you really should never do in a movie or in a story. Essentially, the cavalry comes over the hill and saves everybody.
Right.
It's
Like something totally weird happens that
There's a
would never
term
happen.
for it, and I'm never sure how to pronounce it. Deus ex, God out of the machine is what it means, and it's just God shows up and fixes everything. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Right. Well, and that was going back to the Christian movie genre. That's what happens. Like, oh, this is all a bad situation. We'll
And
just
so
pray
it
and
just
God will fix
magically
it.
fixed.
Yeah.
That's not. I mean, sometimes life works that way, but from a fictional standpoint, storytelling standpoint,
It's not satisfying.
that's not satisfying. Fiction.
Now, what is cool, and in a situation like War of the Worlds, is if he figures out something, or you know, and is able to overcome, that's cool. You like
Yeah.
something you didn't think of. It's
Right.
okay if it's not, if it's even better if it's something you didn't think of, because then it's not predictable.
Yeah, although sometimes it can still be stupid, but if the movie's moving fast enough or you don't stop and think too closely at the time it's going on, it works. For
Or if they
instance,
foreshadow it
yeah.
at,
So for instance, Independence
Early.
Day,
Uh-huh.
the fact that they solved the problem by putting a virus into the aliens thing from a Mac. I mean, realistically, that's not possible.
right?
But it was an interesting way of fixing the problem. It verged awfully close to cavalry riding over the hill type thing. But overall, the movie was satisfying because it kept it moving fast enough, and it worked as long as you didn't analyze it too much afterwards. So you can get away with things that otherwise you shouldn't be able to get away with.
Right.
What's his name? Turtledove, Harry Turtledove, science fiction author, also historian at University of Irvine, I think it is. What he writes primarily are alternate history stories, and he made a comment once that the difference between fiction and history is that fiction has to make sense.
Interesting.
Yeah, because oftentimes history doesn't make sense. American Revolutionary War is a good example of that. That is, if you wrote that as fiction, no, it's not believable. We're used to it, and so we don't think about. That's where this what if thing is interesting, because you start looking at it, you realize this doesn't. No,
Yeah.
it shouldn't have worked. So, too many things had to come together. If you're writing alternate history stories, though, you have to do it with things that most people at least have some inkling of what happened historically. And so that's why you'll find most alternate history novels deal with the American Revolutionary War, the Civil War, maybe some other major history event in European history, or something with Romans, or with World War II. Just because most people know those sorts of things. You also might deal with, say, recent history like Kennedy assassination or something like that, where you could imagine different outcomes. You're not going to pick something that only historians know, because
You just limited your audience.
yeah, you've limited your audience. Plus, also, I mean, it may be a good story, but they wouldn't understand what the real history was versus your alternate, because they don't know the real history either.
Right.
So, if you ever wonder why alternate history science fiction sticks to the same sorts of places in history,
People are
that's the
familiar with
reason,
that.
because that's what people are familiar with. But fiction is useful for helping you think through historical things. It's useful from a science standpoint. It's useful for theology. It's useful for teaching, because that's how people think. Storytelling is what's going to get people's attention. It's going to be what makes people remember
And
what's going
it
on.
gives you a hook to hang the facts on, because
Exactly.
you don't remember things unless you have a place to put it in your brain. So if you tell a story that relates to, not a Mr. Russell story that has nothing to do with anything you're going to talk about, but people will remember, like, oh yeah, you told that story, and I remember, you know, that this is true because of that story. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that reading fiction expands your mind more than just reading nonfiction, because you can play with those elements and make it different, and it really expands your horizons. I think that people that limit themselves to nonfiction or just biographies have seriously limited their thinking. So for an example, my mom and I were talking about heaven, because, you know, after my dad passed away, and she keeps saying, well, your dad doesn't care about us anymore because he's in heaven. And I go, that doesn't even jive with God, because, you know, God created relationships. He created us as a relational people. So it doesn't make sense he would go to heaven and be like, oh, my family? What family? I'm just here in heaven. Whoop-de-doo. You know, but the Bible does say that there will be no more tears, no more crying, you know, things like that. And so how does that correlate? Well, one of the things that you had said as speculation, and I told her this, since God is outside of space and time, perhaps we also come out of space and time and we're all there together at the same time. Even though we're still here trudging around on Earth, in that reality, we're all already there. So then that would be the being together, not thinking about what's going on here on Earth, because that's done, and the no more crying thing.
Yes, because everybody's together. Also,
but then there was also a speculation that someone else brought up to me that I really like as well. And this was a little easier for her to fathom.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to Disneyland with your family, but let's say you go in 2 separate vehicles, and you know the one car is coming, like somebody had an appointment that morning and so they can't come as early. You're at Disneyland. You're not sitting around going, oh, I miss my family. They're not here yet. Like, oh, I can't wait till they get here.
Right.
So, and there's a story to help relate to it, that perhaps he's in anticipation of us being there. And so he's like, oh man, they're going to love it. I'm going to, this is going to be awesome when they get here. And he's not sad because he's anticipating us coming.
Right.
So that worked better for her. So now when she says things like, well, your dad's not thinking about it, I go, I think he's anticipating us coming home to be with him. So.
Yeah. I like my idea better, but that's okay.
So you got to work with people where they are.
You have to work with people where
but
they
see,
are.
she doesn't
adapt the
understand
story
being
to
outside of space and time.
She's not.
And see, what clinched it for me with the whole idea of space and time, that we're stuck in space and time, was I was in the financial aid office at the school. I owed money on my bill, which was like the story of my life back then. It's still the story of my life, but it's not my student loan bill. Well, it still is. I still owe money on my master's. But anyway, so I'm standing in the financial aid office waiting to get raked over the coals, like, why don't you give us more money? And there was an impressionist painting of a street like in Paris or something. And there were people there, and there were like tables, and some people were sitting at the tables, some people were walking on the street. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at this painting like the artist looked at it. I can see everything. I can see that the sky is blue. I can see that there's there's somebody riding their bike around the corner over there, and all that. But if I was one of those figures in the painting, I would be like stuck sitting in this chair. I wouldn't be able to see because I can't move. I'm in a painting. I can't see the guy on the bicycle around the corner. I can't see that the sky is blue because the building that I'm up against is really tall and I can't see the sky. And so for me, that clinched it for me, like, okay, God sees us like an artist sees a painting. He sees the whole thing. He sees the completed work. And he saw it at the beginning. He imagined it. He created it. It's all right there. We're the little people stuck to the walls, stuck to the chairs, and stuck to the bicycle in one place, and we can't conceive of the whole entire painting.
Yeah, we're time bound and we live sequentially.
Right. So.
And God is not time bound, nor does he exist sequentially.
Right.
And so that's why it's hard for us to understand God partially.
Mm-hmm. And how God intervenes in time, because for him it's like, I think you had given me this example, and see here's a story again, is taking books off a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
God's in the library. He can see the entire library. And so now he's going to interact with this book. He takes it off the shelf. He interacts with it. He puts it back. But the thing about God is he can interact with many books at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's good like Google.
Yes. So he, he takes books out and he puts them back, and he interacts with those books at varying times depending on what he's doing.
Yeah.
So.
See, Google can interact with billions of people at once, and it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So God is even better than Google in that regard.
So what time are we looking at?
What time are we?
Oh, we have like 2 minutes.
Oh, why don't we give the little advertising?
Do you know what next week's topic is?
I told you at the beginning, it will be what would Satan do?
Oh, you did say that at the beginning? Must be like Brittany told me that thing twice and I don't remember. Okay, so next week we'll be here about 4 o'clock. What would Satan do?
And talking about the devil. People say that I'm a tool of the devil, but when I talk about him, it's for other reasons.
Well, it's interesting that what would Satan do? Do you hear Madonna was quoted this week as saying that she thinks that Jesus would be okay with abortion. And I was like, yeah, must not be reading your Bible much, huh? So she's just always trying to get a rise out of people, though, and she challenges what people believe about God all the time. But anyway,
that's fine.
So that was interesting. This is not the thing. This is the directions on how to start the video on Sunday morning.
Yes.
It's like
so
turn on the camera. Okay, so A Mirror Darkly is brought to you by Quartz Hill School of Theology, which exists online and in person, www.theology.edu. I know I don't have to say the 3 W's anymore. Theology.edu, you will find free classes if you're interested in particular topics of theology or languages. If you want to get credit for those classes, there is a nominal fee for it. If you want to take classes in person and you live in the area, that's also a possibility too. Quartz Hill School of Theology is part of the ministry of Quartz Hill Community Church, which is at 51st Street West and Avenue K in Quartz Hill. If you live in the Antelope Valley area and you're looking for a place to worship, you can come check us out. We have service at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. If you are not in the area, but you still want to check us out, we do live stream our services. So, Steve, is that a cat or a purple devil? Is that a cat? It looks like a little purple devil. I don't know. Anyway, so you can check us out there as well. If you're in a different time zone, you want to go to church more than once, join us. You get everything. You get the worship, you get the sermon, you get the announcements, the whole 9 yards. So anyway, so join us next week. Participate in the discussion. My phone is here, and then I've got a laptop over here that we can interact with. So, and invite friends to watch too. We have some pretty good topics and some good discussion. So,
Okay.
okay. So we'll see you next week about 4 o'clock
Yep.
Pacific.
Yes, Pacific time. Goodbye.